Everybody for coming to my presentation. First off, is what I would like to say. So today we're going to talk about the low-hanging fruit of digital accessibility. My name is Darren Evans. I work for Wake Tech and the North Carolina Community College System. So my job is for the PD Center is to travel the state and help our community colleges become more accessible. So we're going to talk about 5 simple things you can do today after this presentation to make your content more accessible. As we're going through, if you have questions at any time, please put in the Q&A forum. I do have an ulterior motive. I would like to use this presentation to maybe give you a more expansive view of what accessibility is, a more sort of a broader view of accessibility. So that's sort of my ulterior motive. I want to personalize it. I want you to understand some of the why of accessibility, what we mean when we say that, and how it benefits you and your users, and sort of the utility and the universal design aspect. So the first thing I want to talk about is, no matter where you are, what is your typical user? Well, I think you understand there's no such thing as a typical user. Everyone is different. You have people who have, ranges of disabilities. It could be a visual impairment, dyslexia, a hearing impairment. There are lots of stops along that highway of what it means to be impaired. So you really don't have a typical user. So we want to emphasize sort of universal design, where you can cover as many users as possible with just one sort of process. You want to cover as many users as possible. And I always show this for several reasons whenever I'm talking about accessibility, because this cartoon is instructive of quite a lot. So you have the kid here in the wheelchair. He says, "Could you please shovel the ramp?" And the custodian says, "All these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I'll shovel the ramp for you." And he just tells him, "But if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in." And it's a way to think about widening the path for everybody. And actually, if the custodian would simply shovel the ramp, it would make his work actually a little bit easier. So when I first got into accessibility about, wow, I guess 15 years ago, I started noticing that there was an entity that was suing a lot of our big cities for curb cuts and wheelchair ramps. And whoever this entity was, they didn't want their identity to be known, but they had deep pockets, and they would lobby and threaten to sue for wheelchair ramps and curb cuts. And when I found out who it was, it made perfect sense. It was Federal Express, right? They were suing because curb cuts and wheelchair ramps, physical access is vital to their business. And that really, clicked something in my mind. I realized that once you create these structures, once you create accessibility, it helps everyone. So when I'm traveling across the state of North Carolina, or I did in the before times, and I was talking about accessibility to, our large, small, medium-sized colleges, I always be sure to tell them, when I use the word accessibility, I'm talking about everyone. Okay, I'm not doing things just for people with disabilities or just for visual impairments. I want to create content one time that anyone can use by using structure, by using good pedagogy and good design. So I think this cartoon, again, is instructive about the why of accessibility and the usefulness of it. And we're all disabled sometimes. So this is a picture of me a few years ago. I had a snowball fight with my then 7-year-old, and I lost. But, sorry about that. But I realized during this time, during my rehab, the world is really designed for people who can bend their knees. And in subtle little ways, right? Whether it's picking something up off the floor, whether it's driving a car, cooking dinner, uh, breaststroke swimming, it doesn't matter. The world is designed for people who can bend their knees. So again, it gave me a more expansive view of what accessibility does and what it can do. So we're all disabled sometimes. There's going to be a time, hopefully we'll live long enough where we'll need assistive technology, right? That's a goal. So these are the accessibility standards. And one thing I'm going to do is I don't really talk about the law or the standards that much. Yes, they're useful. I do talk about them. But the main thing we're trying to do, or that I try to do when I'm working with my colleges, is to get them to focus on the people, get them to focus on creating that level playing field of having good structure, of having content that's usable, good pedagogy. That's really what I'm talking about. And a side effect of good content, good pedagogy, good structure, that and accessibility should be and can be two sides of the same coin. So you don't need to know all that LICAC stuff. Your local accessibility person needs to know most of that, probably. But there are some things that you do need to know when it comes to accessibility. Most disabilities, they're invisible, okay? All your users are going to be very different. You do need to know a few basic skills that can make your content more accessible. And again, I think it was Judy Rich this morning who said that this is a journey. And we're constantly learning things, we're constantly improving, we're constantly expanding our knowledge. So I'm just going to give you a few basics of where to start. And then I like to scaffold things when I'm working with colleges. So we have what we call the crawl, walk, run philosophy. So we scaffold things on top of each other. And this is sort of one of the first trainings that we do. So you need to know those few basic skills, and you need to know where to turn to for help. If you have a question, where can you go? Who is there to help you? Who can you email or call to help you with your content? That's one of the things you need to know. So those are the three basics I think most content creators need to know. So now we're going to talk about what I call the low-hanging fruit of digital accessibility. We're going to talk about using headings and styles in documents. And we may go off on a little, I sometimes use sort of strange analogies, but they'll make sense in context. We're going to talk about alternative text and image descriptions. We'll talk about using math type or LaTeX or both for STEM content. We'll talk about captioning videos. And then we'll talk about how you ask questions and use resources. Now, I want to be clear that this is an introduction. I could talk to you for hours about the styles pane in Microsoft Word and what that does and why it's important and how that can automate your document creation process, how that actually helps you as a creator create documents. So the first thing we want to talk about is just using that styles pane in Word. And again, I could talk for hours about this, but the great thing about the styles pane is that it can help you automate the document creation process. So you can set these styles to do almost anything you need them to do as far as fonts, look and feel. So I teach a class on Word to a community college outside of the state. And when I'm teaching my Word class, I do not mention the word accessibility for about the first 10 weeks of class. If someone brings it up, I pretend like I don't know what they're talking about. And the reason I do that, it's a strategic reason for me. I want them to understand the relationship between being really, really efficient at using Word, really knowing you know, what does this fonts group do? Well, why is it there? What does it really do? Okay, what does this paragraphs group do? Why is it there? What does this styles group do? I want them to understand that accessibility is built right into Word. And that most of us, I tell them in the beginning, I say that, most of you have never had a Word class before. You've probably used Word in your life. You just kind of sat down in front of a computer and you did it by trial and error. Well, what I'm going to do in this class is I'm going to show you how to use the built-in features of Word. And that's really all I say. And then I don't really mention accessibility because I want them to see that a side effect of them being really, really efficient at using Word, of really knowing how to use the software, of using those built-in features is accessibility. I don't want them to view accessibility as sort of a separate special thing, that they're two sides of the same coin. And, I always tell them when they say I can't do something, I say, of course you can't. You've never done it before, right? I couldn't do downward dog in my first yoga class. So it takes time to do things. But I encourage you to explore that styles pane, look at it, just kind of see what it does. One of the good things it can do for you is it can, as I said, automate your document production and just make it a lot easier for you. We don't have time to go in depth with that, but that's something I would encourage you to look at and to do. So we're going to also talk about how these styles and how these built-in features were designed with accessibility in mind. We just, like I said, we don't always have a Word class, or we don't always learn their official functions, so to speak. So that's the first thing you can do is really, jump into that styles pane. And next I want to talk to you about alt text and image descriptions. And in the last presentation, someone said, how much detail should you go into with your alt text? And that was really a great question, because I would argue that in higher education, we really only use images for 3 reasons, right? They're an example of something, their decoration, or their actual content. And when I mean content, the previous presentation, you saw that image of Appalachian State in the mountains, and they were talking about, transferring. That's content. Content doesn't necessarily mean all the time academic content. I mean, I'm willing for someone to change my mind on my thesis that we only use images for 3 reasons: their content, their examples, or the decoration. But, we can have that much bigger philosophical discussion at another time. Alternative text should equal the image. I use the word equal in the broadest sense there. Remember, what I'm really talking about here, what we're trying to talk about is accessibility means everyone. It doesn't just mean people with disabilities. It means structuring your content that makes it simple for anyone to interact with. Now, notice I use the word simple, not easy, right? Those are 2 entirely different words with 2 entirely different meanings. So equal means what that image is, what you're doing with that image. And image descriptions are used for everyone. And we use those image descriptions. That puts the image in context for all students. And I'm going to show you an example here. So this is the El Angel statue in downtown Mexico City. Right, my Spanish is bad, but it's on Paseo de la Reforma, which is the main thoroughfare in downtown Mexico City. So if you see this El Angel statue in Mexico City, you're on the main street, north and south, wherever you want to go in Mexico City. Just look for El Angel, and that'll be your landmark, and it will, orient you. Now, this alt text for this image would change depending on the context, right? Is this an art history class? Well, if it is, I'm going to talk about what she has in her right hand and her left hand. I'm going to talk about her skirt or her dress, I suppose, that's billowing in the wind. I may talk about what technique it was that was used to create this sculpture. So my alt text is going to change depending on the context of the image. So when the person asked, how much detail should you put in your alt text? Well, that depends. What's the context? What am I trying to convey here? So I also want to make sure you understand that alt text and image descriptions are two different things, really. Okay. So when I have this is my long description because, this is just in a geography class, and I'm just showing my students a landmark. So it just says a photo of the downtown Mexico City skyline with the El Angel statue in the foreground. The statue is a gold sculpture of the wind goddess Victory, which commemorates Mexico's independence from Spain. Right? In this context, that's all that's important. Okay, so this long description is for everybody. A student using a screen reader, some assistive technology, their screen reader will read out that description. But even, again, I want you to have a more expansive view of what we mean by accessibility. Even my sighted students, they look at the image, they read the description, and hopefully it helps them make that sort of neural connection between, oh, this is the context of this image. It's just showing me downtown Mexico City, what it looks like, why the statue is there. Again, my long description would be a lot different depending on the context or the class or the context of this image. So the same image can have an entirely different context depending on how it's being used. So if this was art history, I may talk about neoclassic sculpture, right? I may go into a bunch of detail on how the artist created the sculpture, why it's in gold, what she's holding, what this represents. I could talk about, if it's a political science class, I may talk about Paseo de la Reforma, how that's an important street in Mexico, right? When someone protests in Mexico City, that's usually where they start. It has a lot of shops and restaurants. It's a very important street politically in Mexico. So if I'm in a political science class, that long description is going to be very, very different than the one I have here in this geography class. So again, alt text is another thing we could talk about I could talk to you about for, hours and hours. What makes good alt text, what makes bad alt text, when to use image descriptions, how long descriptions sort of influence alt text. So now that I have this long description here, for the alt text I put in this PowerPoint presentation, I just simply put El Angel statue, Mexico City. And there was a reason for that, because this long description is for everybody, right? You would never duplicate this long description for your sighted students. So we're not going to do it for our students who use assistive technology either. Right? So that's why the long description is there. So that's just a little taste of image descriptions. And next we're going to talk about a little more about context and complex images. Now, how would you describe this image? Well, again, what is the context? Is this about Halloween costumes? Right? Let's assume this is about Halloween costumes and we work for Old Navy. Okay. So that image description is going to be a lot different if this is about Halloween traditions or about this young boy in particular, right? So again, alt text and image descriptions change based on their context and what you're trying to convey. And remember, Again, I will make this argument, and I am more than willing to be convinced that I'm wrong. And please email me and tell me how I'm wrong here. But I firmly believe that in the higher education context, we really only use those images for three reasons: their decoration, their examples, or their actual content. So that's going to definitely influence how things work. So let's say that this is, I work for Old Navy. This is an image that I want to show on the Old Navy website for Halloween costumes. So, is that a cute kid? That does not matter, right? That's irrelevant to what I'm trying to do. Of course, I think he's cute. I have to say that, though, right? He's mine. But I would talk about the costume itself. This child's wearing a gray shirt with a red and black vest. He has a chain. He's got a cape on. It has a popped up red collar, and he has, artificial fangs. So again, it would depend on that context. So if I'm working for Old Navy, that image description is going to be different. Now, I do want to make sure you understand your images need an image description and alt text. And again, I want you to think about this not in terms of accessibility, okay? I want you to think about this in terms of structure and in terms of usability. Okay, so the more information I can give my students or my consumers, again, you may, maybe you work in the financial aid office at your college. Okay, so maybe you don't have students necessarily, but the more context I can give for why these images are there, those captions, those long descriptions that explain them are going to help me have a more usable course and more usable communication. So one of the things that when I go across the state, I used to travel in the before times, and hopefully at some point I can get back to that. I talk to the colleges a lot about just structure. Okay, we're simply talking about usability and structure. Okay, we're not necessarily even having an accessibility discussion right now. So once I could get them on that road of seeing how UDL, accessibility, structure, usability all go into the same sort of Venn diagram, I suppose, with just overlapping circles. So again, context, context, context. The next thing you can do is, math is difficult, okay? We're getting there. Creating accessible math is getting easier and easier. One of the last frontiers we have in accessible math is graphs, right? Graphing. How do you make a graph accessible? Well, there's a couple ways you can do it. We use manipulatives. We use sonification, which is sound. Use sounds to represent graphs. And I was working at Fayetteville Tech, and they had one of our veterans. He came back. He was blind. He was blinded in Afghanistan, and he was taking Math 172, which is our trig. It's graph heavy. So what we did was, he was taking online, obviously, during COVID. Everyone was worried about, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? How do we convey these graphs? And I said, well, we use manipulatives. And their response was, he's taking it online. Right? I said, the mail still works, right? We have his address. We can mail him these manipulatives to sort of, get the gist of it. And then we're going to use math type in conjunction, and we're going to use some sonification. So if you need to create accessible math, just use math type. What's good about math type is it plugs right into Word. It's very easy for you as a content creator to use. And somebody at your college can make it accessible for, once it's in math type, there's a lot of manipulation we can do to that math to make it accessible. It's not an easy process or a quick process, but it can be done. So MathType is just a plugin for Word. It's $49. And once you create something in MathType, we can convert it into accessible formats. It gives us alternative formats for that content. So that's one of the big things you can do when it comes to accessibility, when it comes to math content, which can be difficult. Another thing you can do is use LaTeX. I know that looks like latex, but it's pronounced LaTeX or LaTeX, depending. And it's just a document preparation system. I'm pretty sure that any math book you've ever used in your life has probably been printed using LaTeX. It's a document process. And it also, once I have something in LaTeX, I can convert it to MathType, I can convert it to HTML, and we can make it more accessible. And in my travels through North Carolina, I've actually stepped foot on 40 of our 58 community colleges. There's always someone there who knows LaTeX, and it depends on where they went to graduate school, pretty much. I used to think it was age, but it has nothing to do with that. It's their program. The people at Appalachian State, or they used to, if you got a master's in math at Appalachian, you used to have to learn LaTeX. And that's something we can convert into accessible formats. So that's one you can use. And let's make sure that videos are captioned. And I just want to tell you a quick story about captioning videos. A long time ago, I did an exchange in Montreal in college, and I had taken French for years and years and years, and I had a lot of experience with French. But I really wasn't that good a speaker. So when I got to Montreal and got used to the cold, that was the first step I had to take. I would just watch I'd watch the weather report every day, and I would do it with the captions on. And in just a couple of weeks of doing that, it helped my French. So again, I'm going back to what I call the FedEx effect. That's what I call it, right? You saw that the people that did a lot of suing, a lot of lobbying for curb cuts and wheelchair ramps was Federal Express. No, the Americans with Disabilities Act was not designed for Federal Express. I don't think the company even existed when the ADA was passed. Yet that infrastructure became critical to what they do as a company. So make sure your videos are captioned. Again, yes, they're for hard of hearing people, but again, when I widen that path, when I add those structures and that usability, everyone benefits, not just people with disabilities. So one of the things that I've noticed over the years when I teach my Word class, one of my students emailed me and said, "Thank you so much for captioning these videos." And I emailed her back. I was just curious. I was like, "Why do you care that I said, you haven't declared a disability. Do you have a disability?" She was like, no, I don't have a disability. I said, "So why do you care that these videos are captioned?" She said, "Well, I have two young twins at home, right? And they sleep in our room and sort of portable cribs. And she worked full time, and she was like, I do my studying at night, and they're really light sleepers. So I watch all the welcome videos or the videos that I post. She watches those at night while she's studying, looking after her kids, and she used the captions. So again, it's that sort of that widening the path, that usability that ends up helping. It ends up helping everyone. The last thing you need to know is where can you go to ask questions? Okay, who do you talk to? Who can you ask questions to? Where can you figure out things that you don't know? And one of my philosophies in life, in general, I first got into this business I was a middle school teacher, and I had a minor in computer science, and I would program for a company here in Raleigh at night. I would do that, part time. one day my boss came out and said, we got to make everything we do screen reader accessible. I looked at her and said, no problem, boss, we got it. And I look at my buddy Scott and go, what's a screen reader? He goes, I think it's when you hire this person. I said, oh, you don't know either then, right? He's like, no, I don't know either. So when I don't know something, what I do is I look on Google, I figure out, who will know that, and I just call them. And I've done that my whole career, and I've never had anybody not answer a question. So when it comes to questions you may have on accessibility, I'm sure you probably have an accessibility person at your campus. And not to stereotype, but we accessibility people, we love to talk, right? So we'll tell you what we know. And sometimes it's hard to, for people to get out of my office sometimes, because I just love to talk. But there's somebody at your campus who can help you. If you don't have an accessibility at your campus, you can reach out to me, email me at any time. My email is daevans3@waketech.edu. So I'd be more than happy to help you with any kind of issue you may have. I mean, if you want to know more about using styles, or why headings are good, or how they can help you, or even that relationship between being efficient at Word and accessibility, and how that UDL and that structure and accessibility sort of go hand in hand, how those are actually, two sides of the same coin. All right, well, that's all I have for you. Do we have some questions?
Yeah, Darren. So this is great. Your slide here transitions perfectly into a couple of questions that have showed up in the Q&A. This first one is kind of long, so sort of bear with me as we go through this. This is a question about alternative text, especially if you have a very complex image. And the question is, what is best practice and or recommendation if you're filling in the alternative text for something like a graph or an image for a student who is blind, and the graph, image, etc. is explained in good detail in the text surrounding the image, like before or after it? Can you just put the title of it, and then in the context area put graph, image, etc. is explained in detail on page 56 under XYZ heading?
That's exactly what I would do if it was explained in detail. And again, that gets to the context. If it's explained in like great detail, and my sighted students would understand it from that description. If my students using assistive technology would understand it from that description, then yes, that's exactly how we'll do it. And in that case, so I've got, we do trainings on STEM image description, regular image description, whatever. And I consulted with a lot of blind users that I know, and they gave me recommendations. And that was actually one of the recommendations that I got from my visually impaired users. So I would just call them and say, look, if I'm describing an image, I use sort of that example. I said, say I'm doing domain and range in calculus. That was the example that we sort of stuck with. I said, how would you do that, and what's important? And they gave me a lot of guidelines. We don't have time, obviously, going to them today. But one of the main takeaways was brevity, okay? Be as concise as possible, but, as expansive as possible. One of the blind users used a good analogy. He said it should be like a concert. I was like, a concert? He said, yeah, it should be long enough to cover all the good songs, but short enough to be interesting, right? So make sure that you don't talk about color. He's like, I don't care about color in these graphs. So, and he was also the one I got the don't duplicate things. He said, if the description is there under the image, don't put that in the alt text. You wouldn't do that for sighted users. So that's how I would answer that one. I'm sorry.
That was great. Wonderfully detailed answer there. Perfect. We've got two more questions, and I think we do have time. We've got about 10 more minutes. this question can be for you, Darren, for sure. And then if anybody has any tips or tricks, feel free to put it in chat. This question is any accessibility features, tips, or tricks for the Google apps like Docs, Sheets, Slides, etc.
Yeah, I think Kate put a link to some accessibility features for Google Docs in the chat. Is that right, Kate? Kate from Davidson, I think, did that. So I think there's.
It has been a long day, so maybe I did, but I certainly
I'm sorry.
can. I certainly can talk about or I can put something in about the Grackle add-on, and folks can email otherwise. But other than like tips and tricks, that might be, if you have anything, Darren, go for it.
Okay, I was going to put the same link that Kate put in. So yeah, I'll type that link in the chat during our next one.
Okay, great. And then the last question here, can you recommend a software that has error-free auto captioning?
Nope.
LOL right now.
Nope, because one does not exist. I'm sorry. And okay, you're gonna, I see we have a little bit of time, right? So yeah, we got time. So this answer is going to be more expansive than you probably want, but no, I cannot, because one does not exist. I will say that the auto captions in Google and YouTube are getting really, really good, but error-free, no. And I do want to kind of get back to something in the previous session. Someone asked about accessibility checkers, accessibility tools. And so when I'm doing a presentation at a national conference, which I used to do in the old days, in the before times, so I do a presentation on, say, accessible Word. And people would always come up to me afterwards and said, you didn't talk about the accessibility checker. And I'd say, no, I did not. Because the tool is only as good as the mechanic, right? So if you have a tool, let's talk about alt text, for instance. So in Word, I can type in alt text. I could type in the letter Y. The accessibility checker will say you have alt text. And we know that's not good alt text. So there is really no automated feature yet that takes the place of human judgment when it comes to accessibility. The most important part of accessibility is people, is you, a content creator, asking those questions. Using your common sense. Is this usable? Does this make sense? Is this structured well? And like I said, when I'm talking to people across the state, a lot of times it's not about, I'll use the relationship analogy, right? Sometimes my wife and I are talking about laundry, but we're not really talking about laundry, right? Sometimes when we're talking about accessibility, we're really talking about structure. We're talking about usability. We're talking about pedagogy. And accessibility can be, it is a vital part of that. But it's also, there's a deeper meaning. And one of my goals for this presentation today was to get at least a few of you to think a little bit differently about what we mean by accessibility, about how that applies to everyone, about how we want to create content one time that anyone can use, that our view of that is expansive and all-encompassing. So no, I cannot recommend any error-free auto caption because one doesn't exist.
Darren,
But,
if you would, Darren, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to add just a little bit to that real quick. Do you mind?
Sure.
Hi, this is Brad from UNC's Chapel Hill. And one of the projects that the collaborative, our Digital Accessibility Higher Education Collaborative, is working on is this clarification between when to use auto captions, such as in this live event, and when auto captions are appropriate in post-recorded content. And the answer to that, it never is, just because, as we mentioned, they're not error-free, and the accuracy rate needs to be higher when it's a post one. So look for a resource from our collaborative coming in the coming months that will help with this. And just the base of what Darren was saying is this is a collaborative. And so, and people collaborate on captions, they collaborate on websites. And so Keep in mind, we don't want to just stick to our computers and you know, and our AI or artificial intelligence to do everything. We want to be sure that it is an interactive and collaborative process in everything we do. So.
That's a good point, Brad. And I was going to talk about if it's, you know, it's not a live event. I'm sure they've messed up some of my words. I have a thick Southern accent, so I'm sure some things probably came out in the transcription that were not exactly what I was intending to say. But when it's post recording, you should correct it and make it as usable as possible. And one of the things that, another thing I'd like to talk about real quickly, I think I have about 5 minutes here, is I've literally remediated thousands of Word documents, made them accessible. I mean, literally. But anytime I see, or I go to a conference or hear anybody doing a presentation on accessible documents, accessible Word, I always go to it. And I always learn something. Now, rarely do I learn something technical I didn't know, but I always learn something, whether it's another metaphor, whether it's a better analogy, whether it's another approach to things. So, that's one thing I would encourage you to reach out to the collaborative. It's a good group. I've learned a lot there. And we can help you. If you've got accessibility people, you've got a good crew there at UNC and who's sponsoring this. So if you're at UNC, go talk to Brad. All right, go talk to Sarah. Go talk to them and see, let them share what they know to help you make things more accessible. Because it's really about equity. It's about giving everybody the same chance, not the same result, okay? That's not what we're saying, but giving everybody the same chance to excel and putting your students, your colleagues in a position to be successful. That's what it's about. So I've got a few, or had a few. Here's a few resources for you. The Diagram Center I really recommend because they have image description guidelines. It's really, really good. I've got the YCAD guidelines. WebAIM is good. The DAISY Consortium does a lot with EPUBs now, so we're trying to sort of replace PDFs and then where you can find MathType. Once again, I just want to say thank you for sharing some time with me, for coming here. I really appreciate you taking some time to listen to my presentation. And I hope that everyone learned something, maybe if it was just another way to look at accessibility and ways we can make our content more accessible and mostly the why of how we do that. So thanks a lot. And I'm looking